My name is Courtney, 32 years old. I still remember how my jaw dropped at the lawyer's office. My parents left everything to my brother Jackson. Millions in assets, property, their entire art collection. And what did I get? A single ugly painting that hung in my grandmother's study. It seemed worthless, insulting even. But when my cat accidentally knocked it down, I discovered strange numbers hidden behind it. Suddenly, my family members who never cared about me were showing up at my door, desperate to get their hands on my worthless inheritance. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like this video if you've ever felt undervalued by family. Trust me, what I discovered will shock you. Growing up, our house was more like an art gallery than a family home. My parents, Franklin and Margaret Bennett, owned one of the most successful art investment companies on the East Coast. Their social calendar revolved around gallery openings, private auctions, and fundraisers where they could showcase their knowledge and expand their collection. Art wasn't just decoration for them, it was currency, status, power. My brother Jackson was the golden child from day one. 3 years older than me, he had our father's sharp business mind and our mother's social grace. While I struggled with math homework, Jackson was discussing market trends with Dad. When I tried to join conversations about art, my input was politely acknowledged, then swiftly forgotten, despite my genuine passion for the subject. "Courtney, dear, art appreciation is lovely," my mother would say, "but Jackson understands art as an investment." That distinction followed us throughout childhood. Jackson understood value. I merely appreciated aesthetics. Our family home in Greenwich, Connecticut, stretched across 5 acres, with dedicated rooms for different periods and styles of art. Renaissance pieces occupied the formal dining room. Impressionists lined the sunroom, and contemporary works dominated the main living area. My parents rotated pieces regularly, treating their home as a curated exhibition space. I remember one particular Christmas when I was 12. Jackson received a small Picasso sketch, a genuine one valued at over $50,000. I received art books. When I expressed interest in a painting class, my father laughed and said, "Let's leave the creating to the professionals, sweetheart. Better to learn which artists to buy." Jackson never showed particular interest in the artwork itself, but he could recite market values and investment potential of every piece in our home. My grandmother Eliza was different. My mother's mother lived with us after my grandfather passed, occupying the east wing of our home until her death when I was 17. Her study was the only room my parents didn't redecorate, perhaps out of respect or simple disinterest in its contents. "Art isn't about its price tag, Courtney," she would tell me while showing me her modest collection. "It's about the story it tells, the secrets it holds." I spent countless afternoons in that study listening to her stories about travels and artists she'd met decades ago. Unlike my parents, she asked about my interpretations of paintings, valued my perspectives. As I grew older, the divide between Jackson and me widened. He followed our father into business, attending Wharton and returning with an MBA and connections that helped him launch his own investment firm. I studied art history at NYU, later securing a position as an assistant curator at a small but respected museum in Brooklyn. My apartment couldn't have been more different from my brother's Central Park adjacent penthouse. My one-bedroom in Park Slope was filled with books, vintage finds from flea markets, and prints of my favorite artworks. I lived comfortably but modestly on my museum salary, occasionally supplemented by freelance writing about emerging artists. My friend Sophie was the family I chose. We met in college and bonded over being the black sheep in families of high achievers. Her parents wanted a lawyer. She became a graphic designer. She understood my struggles without me having to explain. "Your parents collect art but don't understand its soul," she told me once after a particularly difficult family dinner where my promotion to associate curator was overshadowed by Jackson's new partnership deal. That dinner remained vivid in my memory. I had practiced how I would announce my promotion, rehearsed answers to questions I hoped they would ask. Mom had prepared Jackson's favorite meal, filet mignon, with truffled potatoes. "I have some news," I said during a rare moment of silence. "The museum promoted me to associate curator. I'll be organizing the upcoming Modern American Artists exhibition." "That's nice, dear," my mother replied, barely looking up. Jackson, tell everyone about your new partners. My brother launched into a detailed explanation of his firm's expansion, my news forgotten. I caught my father checking his watch during my brief description of my exhibition plans. When Jackson mentioned potential returns on his latest venture, Dad leaned forward, fully engaged. That's my boy, he said proudly, clapping Jackson on the shoulder. Always thinking ahead. Sophie found me crying in my apartment that night. They'll never see me, I told her. Nothing I do will ever matter to them. She hugged me tight. Then stop trying to make them see. Live for yourself, not their approval. I tried to follow her advice, but the longing for parental approval never quite disappeared. Each family gathering became an exercise in managing expectations and protecting my heart, a skill I never fully mastered despite years of practice. My parents' home contained art worth millions, but their most valuable possession was the respect they withheld, doling out approval to Jackson in generous portions while leaving only crumbs for me. I learned to survive on those crumbs, convincing myself they were enough, that someday they would see my value beyond the price tags they were so fond of assigning. The call came on a Tuesday morning in April. I was at the museum preparing for a new exhibition when my phone lit up with my Uncle Gregory's number. There's been an accident, he said, his voice uncharacteristically somber. Your parents' car went off the road outside Milan. They didn't make it, Courtney. The world tilted sideways. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't process his words. My parents had been in Italy on an art acquisition trip, something they did several times a year. The routine nature of their travel made the news even more surreal. Jackson's arranging to bring them home, Uncle Gregory continued. The funeral will be next week. I moved through the following days in a fog. The museum gave me bereavement leave, colleagues sent flowers and cards, but nothing penetrated the strange numbness that had settled over me. I hadn't spoken to my parents in almost 3 weeks before their death. Our last conversation had been brief, perfunctory. They were rushing to a gallery opening and had little time for small talk. The funeral was held at our family church, a grand stone building where generations of Bennetts had marked life's milestones. The pews filled with art world figures, business associates, and society friends, many of whom I recognized from childhood events, but whose names escaped me now. Jackson handled the arrangements with his typical efficiency. He stood tall in an impeccably tailored black suit, accepting condolences with grace and appropriate grief. I sat beside him during the service, feeling oddly disconnected, as though watching the proceedings from a distance. Aunt Paula, my father's sister, kept her arm around me during the eulogies. Uncle Gregory and his wife sat behind us with my cousins. The extended family had gathered completely for the first time in years, drawn together by unexpected tragedy. Your mother would want you to be strong, Aunt Paula whispered, as Jackson delivered a moving speech about our parents' legacy. I nodded mechanically, uncertain what strength was supposed to look like in that moment. My grief was complicated, tangled with unresolved feelings about our relationship. I mourned not just my parents, but the approval I would never receive, the questions that would remain forever unanswered, the reconciliation that could never come. 2 weeks after the funeral, Harold Thompson, my parents' longtime attorney, called a meeting to read the will. We gathered at my parents' home, the art-filled rooms now seeming like a museum without its curators. Jackson sat across from me in our father's study, one leg crossed casually over the other, while Harold arranged papers on the mahogany desk. Aunt Paula, Uncle Gregory, and several other relatives sat nearby, their presence supposedly supportive, but feeling more like witnesses to a performance whose outcome was predetermined. I smoothed my skirt nervously while Jackson checked emails on his phone, seemingly unconcerned. Harold cleared his throat and began reading. The contents of the will unfolded exactly as I had expected: the Greenwich home, the Manhattan apartment, the villa in Tuscany, all to Jackson. The investment company shares the stock portfolio, the cash accounts to Jackson. The art collection valued at over $12 million to Jackson. My name wasn't mentioned until the very end. I sat straighter, a tiny flicker of hope igniting despite years of experience that should have taught me better. And to my daughter, Courtney Bennett. Harold read, adjusting his glasses. I leave the painting hanging in my mother's study as per her wishes. The room fell silent. I blinked, certain I had misheard. One painting. From grandmother's study, the will continued with charitable donations and smaller bequests to longtime staff, but I couldn't focus on the words. Jackson caught my eye across the room and offered what might have been intended as a sympathetic smile, but looked more like satisfaction. Aunt Paula patted my hand awkwardly. Which painting? I finally asked when Harold finished reading. The landscape above the desk, Harold replied, retrieving something from his briefcase. This one. He handed me a photograph of an abstract landscape, predominantly blues and greens, with odd discoloration along one edge. I recognized it immediately, a painting I had seen countless times in Grandmother Eliza's study, not particularly attractive or significant. It wasn't by any artist I recognized, signed only with the initials TM in the lower corner. But, I began, then stopped, unsure what to say. What could I say? That it was unfair, that seemed childishly obvious. That there must be some mistake, the precise language of the will suggested otherwise. Perhaps your mother thought you had sentimental attachment to it. Aunt Paula suggested, her tone making clear she found the bequest as puzzling as I did. Uncle Gregory examined the photo over my shoulder. Can't be worth much, not like their Monet or that Basquiat they bought last year. Jackson stood buttoning his suit jacket. The painting can be delivered to your apartment this week if that works for you. His voice had the artificial brightness people use when trying to move past an uncomfortable moment. I nodded mutely, clutching the photograph as relatives began to disperse, murmuring about dinner plans and travel arrangements. Their voices washed over me as I remained seated, trying to process what had just happened. Harold approached as the room emptied. The painting is being professionally packaged, he said quietly. I'll have it delivered tomorrow. I looked up at him, searching for some explanation in his expression. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, something that wasn't pity or embarrassment, but something more deliberate. My grandmother requested this specifically, I asked. Harold nodded. Your mother was following Eliza's wishes. He hesitated, then added, some inheritances aren't what they first appear, Courtney. Before I could ask what he meant, Jackson returned, placing a hand on Harold's shoulder. We should discuss the transfer of the company assets, he said, steering the lawyer toward the door. I sat alone in the study afterward, surrounded by art that would soon belong to my brother, holding a photo of the one piece that was now mine, seemingly worthless compared to everything around it, yet somehow specified by name in my parents' will. It felt like a final confirmation of how they valued me compared to Jackson. Even in death, they had found a way to make the distinction clear. The painting arrived the next afternoon, delivered by a white-gloved courier from an art handling company. The level of care seemed excessive for such an unremarkable piece, but I supposed my parents' reputation in the art world demanded certain standards be maintained even for insignificant items. I unwrapped it carefully in my living room, peeling back layers of acid-free paper and bubble wrap. In person, the painting looked even less impressive than in the photograph, an amateurish landscape with uneven brushstrokes and peculiar color choices. The frame was simple wood, slightly worn at the corners. Nothing about it suggested value, either artistic or monetary. Sophie came over that evening, bringing wine and takeout as soon as she heard about the will reading. She found me staring at the painting, which I had propped against my bookshelf, unable to decide whether it deserved wall space. So that's it, she asked, setting down bags of Thai food on my coffee table. That's what they left you. I nodded, pouring generous glasses of Cabernet. The sum total of my inheritance, one ugly painting. Sophie studied it, head tilted. Maybe it's secretly valuable, like one of those stories where someone has a priceless masterpiece and doesn't know it. I shook my head. I'm a curator, Sophie. I know enough to recognize this isn't some undiscovered treasure. The artist isn't even someone I've heard of, just initials TM. Your grandmother requested you get this specifically. According to the lawyer, yes. Though why she would want me to have this particular painting is beyond me. I took a long sip of wine. Meanwhile, Jackson gets everything else. The houses, the company, the entire art collection. Millions of dollars worth of assets. Sophie squeezed my hand. It's not fair. It's not right. It's perfectly on brand for my parents, I replied, the wine loosening my tongue. One last reminder of where I stood in the family hierarchy. We ate dinner sitting on floor cushions, the painting watching us like an unwelcome guest. Sophie tried to distract me with museum gossip and stories about her latest design client, but my eyes kept returning to the canvas. I should probably just donate it, I said eventually. Give it to a thrift store or something. Are you sure it's your last connection to your family? I considered this, running my fingers along the frame's edge. Despite its aesthetic shortcomings, the painting had hung in my grandmother's study for as long as I could remember. I'd spent countless hours in that room with her learning about art and life, while that very canvas hung on the wall behind her desk. Maybe I'll keep it for now, I conceded. For sentimental reasons. After Sophie left, I found myself examining the painting more closely, professional curiosity temporarily overriding emotional exhaustion. The signature was small, just TM, in the lower right corner, no date. The canvas had been properly stretched, but showed signs of amateur preparation. The landscape itself was abstract, suggesting rolling hills and perhaps water, but with strange proportions and perspective. What had grandmother Eliza seen in this piece? She had owned far better works, including several by recognized artists. Why had she specified this one for me? I remembered afternoons in her study, sunlight streaming through tall windows as she showed me art books and told stories about artists she'd met in her youth. Unlike my parents, she never treated art as mere investment. For her, each piece contained history, emotion, meaning beyond its market value. Sometimes true value isn't what's on display, Courtney, she had told me once while showing me a small bronze sculpture. Sometimes it's hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right person to discover it. I had assumed she was speaking metaphorically, a gentle way of encouraging me, despite my parents' indifference. Now, looking at this unremarkable painting, I wondered if there had been more to her words. Grandmother Eliza had loved puzzles, codes, hidden meanings. Her study contained shelves of mystery novels and puzzle boxes. She taught me chess and complex card games, delighting when I spotted patterns or solved problems. Could this painting contain some message, some puzzle she had left for me to solve? I laughed at myself for the thought. Grief was making me melodramatic, searching for meaning where there was likely none. This was simply an ugly painting that had hung in her study, nothing more. Still, I found myself hanging it on my living room wall before going to bed. It looked out of place among my carefully curated prints and photographs, but something about discarding it felt wrong. I fell asleep on the couch that night, wine glass empty beside me. The painting, the last thing I saw before closing my eyes. In my dreams, the landscape shifted and changed, revealing pathways and doors that hadn't been visible before. Grandmother Eliza's voice guiding me forward through the canvas into unknown territory beyond. I woke to the sound of something crashing. Bleary-eyed, I sat up on the couch to find my cat Darwin looking suspiciously innocent beside the fallen painting on the floor. "Darwin, bad cat," I scolded, hurrying to assess the damage. The frame had split at one corner, and as I lifted it, I noticed the paper backing had come loose, revealing the edge of the canvas stretching. My initial annoyance shifted to curiosity. As a museum curator, I'd seen the backs of countless paintings during installation processes. This backing seemed oddly thick with what appeared to be another layer beneath it. Carefully, I brought the painting to my dining table and, using the precision skills developed through years of handling artifacts, began to remove the damaged backing paper completely. As I peeled it away, my breath caught. There, written directly on the canvas stretcher in what appeared to be my grandmother's neat handwriting, was a series of numbers and symbols: CH 708 14 62249 881, SH 44 11.7N 76.5 BW, FK 09876 A4377. Below these in smaller writing, for Courtney's eyes only, the key is in the daffodils. I stared at the numbers, my heart pounding. This was no accident, no random notation. This was deliberately hidden information clearly meant for me to find. But what did it mean? The first sequence looked like it might be a bank account, but the others were completely mysterious. I quickly took photos with my phone, then spent the next several hours researching possible meanings online. The CH prefix suggested Switzerland Confederatio Helvetica, and that aligned with what I knew of my grandmother. She had traveled extensively in Europe during her youth and often spoke of Switzerland with particular fondness. The second sequence appeared to be coordinates of some kind, though inputting them into map applications yielded locations in the middle of the ocean, which couldn't be right. The third sequence remained completely opaque, perhaps a safety deposit box code or another account I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and devoted the day to research. By afternoon, I had connected with Dr. James Wilson, a colleague at the museum who specialized in art authentication and had extensive experience with European collections. These could very well be Swiss bank account numbers, he confirmed over coffee in his office, examining my photos. The format is consistent with private accounts from the mid-20th century. The CH definitely refers to Switzerland. And the other sequences? He shook his head. The middle one looks like coordinates, but they're not in standard format. The last one could be anything, a safety deposit reference, perhaps. What about the key is in the daffodils? I asked. That's the most intriguing part, Dr. Wilson admitted. It suggests there's another piece to this puzzle. Did your grandmother have any connection to daffodils? Paintings, jewelry, other possessions? I thought back to her study, trying to recall any daffodil motifs or references. Nothing immediate came to mind, though. I remembered she always had fresh daffodils in her room during spring. Returning to my apartment, I examined the painting again. The landscape contained no daffodils that I could see, though the yellowish discoloration along one edge might possibly suggest a field of flowers if you squinted. I spent hours searching online for information about Swiss banking systems, learning about their legendary privacy protocols and numbered accounts. My grandmother had never mentioned having Swiss accounts, but she had traveled to Zurich several times during my childhood trips I had assumed were simply vacation. Around midnight, as I was about to give up for the day, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject: regarding your inheritance. Body: be careful with what you found. Not everyone wants you to have it. The message was unsigned. The email address a random sequence of letters and numbers. I stared at it, a chill running down my spine. Someone knew I had discovered the numbers. Someone was watching. I checked my apartment door locks twice before going to bed, the painting now securely stored in my closet rather than on display. As I drifted toward uneasy sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that what I'd discovered was valuable enough to make others nervous, perhaps valuable enough to explain the lawyer's knowing look when he had handed me the painting. What had my grandmother hidden from me, and who else knew about it? The call from Jackson came 3 days after my discovery. His name lighting up my phone screen was unusual enough. We typically communicated through brief texts or family group emails, rarely direct calls. "Courtney, how are you holding up?" he asked, his voice carrying the forced casualness that always characterized our adult interactions. "I'm managing," I replied cautiously. "Good, good." He cleared his throat. "Listen, I've been thinking about that painting you inherited, the one from grandmother's study." My pulse quickened, but I kept my tone neutral. "What about it?" "Well, I know it's not worth much monetarily, but it occurs to me it might have sentimental value for the family. I'd be happy to take it off your hands, give you something more valuable in exchange. Perhaps one of the smaller Degas sketches." The offer would have seemed generous under normal circumstances, a Degas sketch worth tens of thousands in exchange for an unknown artist's work. But now, with those numbers hidden behind the canvas, Jackson's sudden interest seemed suspicious. "That's thoughtful," I said carefully, "but I've grown attached to it. Reminds me of afternoons in grandmother's study. Courtney, be reasonable. His voice hardened slightly. That painting doesn't fit your collection at all. It's practically worthless while a Degas would appreciate significantly. I'm trying to help you here. Why the sudden interest in an ugly landscape, Jackson? You've never shown any attachment to grandmother's things before. A brief pause. It would complete the family collection. Everything should stay together. Funny that consideration didn't apply when you inherited everything else, I said, surprising myself with my directness. The painting stays with me. The conversation ended shortly after, with Jackson barely concealing his frustration. I had barely hung up when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Aunt Paula standing in the hallway, her expensive handbag clutched tightly against her designer suit. "Courtney, darling," she exclaimed when I opened the door. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check on you. These first weeks after losing someone are so difficult." Her unexpected concern might have been touching if she hadn't immediately scanned my apartment, eyes searching every wall until they landed on the space where the painting had hung. "Redecorating?" she asked, noticing its absence. "Just moving things around," I replied. "Would you like some tea?" Over the next 30 minutes, Aunt Paula circled our conversation back to the painting 3 separate times, eventually offering to have it professionally restored as a gift if I would let her take it. "It's fine as is," I insisted, growing increasingly certain that my discovery was significant. The next day brought a call from Uncle Gregory, claiming he was documenting family heirlooms for insurance purposes and needed to photograph the painting. When I deflected, suggesting he could use the photo Harold had already provided, his friendly demeanor cooled noticeably. That evening, I laid out everything I knew for Sophie. "My family suddenly can't live without this painting they've ignored for decades," I concluded. "Something about those numbers is important, maybe very important." "Maybe your grandmother left you money," Sophie suggested, "and they all know about it." "But why hide it this way? Why not just tell me?" Before Sophie could respond, my doorbell rang again. Through the peephole, I saw both Jackson and Aunt Paula standing in the hallway. "Courtney, we need to talk," Jackson called through the door. "It's important." I glanced at Sophie, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door but blocked the entrance. "What's so urgent?" "May we come in?" Aunt Paula asked, already trying to peer around me into the apartment. "Actually, I was just heading out," I lied. "What did you need?" Jackson's professional facade slipped slightly. "The painting, Courtney. There's been a misunderstanding in the will. That particular piece was meant to remain with the main collection." "That's not what the will said," I replied. "Harold was very specific. The painting from grandmother's study goes to me." "There's information you don't have," Aunt Paula interjected. "Family matters that need resolution." Jackson leaned closer. "If this is about the account, we can discuss sharing the contents. But the painting needs to come back to the family." The slip confirmed everything Jackson knew about the numbers, knew they related to an account. This wasn't about sentimental value or completing a collection. "There is no misunderstanding," I said firmly. "The painting is mine legally and rightfully. Whatever else you're referring to, I suggest you discuss with Harold." "Don't be difficult," Jackson snapped, his composed demeanor finally cracking. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Father would want—" "Father made his wishes clear in his will," I interrupted. "As did Mother. Now I have plans this evening, so if you'll excuse me." "We can challenge the will," Aunt Paula warned. "There are grounds for contesting bequests when information was withheld." Something in me, perhaps years of acquiescence, perhaps grief, perhaps the shock of discovering my family's true colors, finally snapped. "Challenge whatever you want," I said, my voice steady and stronger than I'd ever used with family. "The painting stays with me. Now please leave before I call building security." I closed the door on their protests, leaning against it as my heart raced. Through the peephole, I watched them argue in the hallway before finally departing. "Holy shit," Sophie whispered, wide-eyed. "I've never seen you stand up to them like that." "Neither have I," I admitted, feeling a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. That night, checking my building's security camera footage through the tenant portal, I spotted Jackson's car parked across the street. Then Aunt Paula returning to the building lobby, only to be turned away by the doorman. "We need to figure this out quickly," I told Sophie. "Whatever's behind those numbers, they want it badly enough to stake out my apartment." "Then we need to beat them to it," she replied, determination in her voice. "Whatever your grandmother left for you, she meant for you to have it, not them." 2 days later, Sophie and I landed in Zurich, having depleted my modest savings account for last-minute flights. The crisp Swiss air felt worlds away from Brooklyn, the pristine streets and precision of the city, reflecting the banking culture it was famous for. "Are you sure about this?" Sophie asked as we approached the imposing stone building that housed the Helvetia Private Banking Association. "We don't even know if these numbers will mean anything to them." "I have to try," I replied, clutching my passport and the carefully photographed numbers from behind the painting. "Someone in my family thinks this is worth harassing me over. I need to know what my grandmother left for me." The banking hall echoed with hushed conversations and the subtle sounds of wealth being managed. Crystal chandeliers hung from ornate ceilings, the furniture all dark wood and leather. We approached a reception desk where a perfectly groomed woman regarded us with professional neutrality. "I would like to inquire about an account," I said, keeping my voice low. "I believe my grandmother may have held an account here." "Your grandmother's name?" she asked. "Eliza Bennett." After checking some records, she directed us to a private office where Hans Weber, a silver-haired banker with wire-rimmed glasses, greeted us with formal politeness. "Miss Bennett," he said, gesturing toward leather chairs. "How may I assist you today?" I explained my situation, my grandmother's recent passing, the discovery of numbers behind a painting left specifically to me. As I spoke, his expression remained carefully neutral, but his attention sharpened noticeably. "May I see the numbers you discovered?" he asked. I showed him the photographs. He studied them carefully, then set them aside and regarded me thoughtfully. "We have strict protocols regarding account access," he explained. "Even confirming the existence of an account requires specific verification processes." "What would those processes entail?" I asked. "For accounts of this nature established before modern electronic systems, we require family identification, documentation of relation to the account holder, and any specified verification items mentioned in the account creation." The phrase "accounts of this nature" confirmed my suspicions. These numbers did indeed reference something within this bank. "I have my passport and my grandmother's death certificate," I said. "I can provide documentation proving she was my maternal grandmother." He nodded. "And the verification item?" I hesitated. "There was a message referring to the key is in the daffodils, but I don't know what that means specifically." Something flickered in Weber's eyes, recognition perhaps. "One moment," he said, rising from his desk. He returned several minutes later with an older colleague who introduced himself as Director Becker. The men conferred quietly in German before Becker addressed me. "Miss Bennett, there is indeed an account associated with these numbers established by Eliza Bennett in 1972. The verification protocol involves a specific painting, an abstract landscape with the initials TM." My heart raced. "I have photographs of the painting." I showed them images on my phone. Becker nodded, seemingly satisfied. "The final verification is a question only the intended recipient would know. Where did Eliza first see daffodils bloom in winter?" I thought back to my grandmother's stories, the afternoons in her study, her tales of travel in her youth. Then it clicked. "Cornwall," I said confidently. "She told me about visiting the Isles of Scilly in January when she was 20, seeing fields of daffodils blooming while the rest of England was covered in snow." Becker and Weber exchanged glances, then Becker smiled slightly. "Welcome to Helvetia Private Banking, Miss Bennett. Your grandmother's account awaits you." What followed was a series of forms and procedures culminating in Weber leading Sophie and me to a secure room where he presented a large envelope and a safety deposit box. "These have been held in trust since 1972, he explained. The account contains monetary assets which have been conservatively invested according to standing instructions. The box contains personal items Mrs. Bennett wanted preserved. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope first. Inside was a letter addressed to me in my grandmother's handwriting, dated just months before her death, when I was 17. My dearest Courtney, if you're reading this, you've discovered what I've kept safe for you. The funds in this account represent my personal inheritance and earnings separate from the Bennett family fortune. Your grandfather and I agreed this money would remain mine to distribute as I saw fit. I've watched you grow into a thoughtful, compassionate young woman with a true love of art that goes beyond its monetary value, something your parents and brother never understood. I've also observed how your parents favor Jackson, how they dismiss your interests and passions. I cannot change their behavior, but I can ensure you have the means to pursue your dreams independently. This account contains just over $3 million conservatively invested. By the time you find this, it should have grown significantly. The safety deposit box contains jewelry from my mother and documentation you may find illuminating regarding family history. The painting itself has no monetary value. It was created by a friend during my time in Switzerland, but I knew its unremarkable appearance would ensure it remained overlooked and undesired by those who only see worth in famous names and auction prices. Your parents are aware of this account's existence, but not its contents or access details. They attempted to convince me to add it to the main family holdings before my death, but I refused. This is for you alone. Live boldly, pursue your passions, and remember that true value isn't always visible on the surface. With all my love, Grandmother Eliza. Tears streamed down my face as Sophie squeezed my hand. The box contained vintage jewelry photographs of my grandmother in her youth, and a folder of legal documents including correspondence between my parents and Swiss lawyers attempting to locate and access Eliza's separate accounts after her death. They knew, I whispered to Sophie. They knew she had money somewhere but couldn't access it without the painting and codes. And now it's yours, she replied. All of it. As we processed the paperwork to establish my access to the account now worth nearly $7 million after decades of conservative investment, my phone buzzed with multiple messages from Jackson. The final one simply read, "Harold told us everything. This isn't over, Courtney." In that moment, surrounded by evidence of my grandmother's love and foresight, I felt something I had rarely experienced with my family's strength. Whatever challenges Jackson and the others might present, I would face them on equal footing at last. The flight back to New York gave me time to process everything. According to the banking records, my grandmother had established the account decades ago with funds from selling several valuable paintings she had inherited from her own family prior to marrying my grandfather. She had maintained the account secretly throughout her marriage, adding to it occasionally through small personal art sales. More surprising were the documents showing that my parents had actively searched for this money after her death. Letters from various lawyers and investigators confirmed they had been trying to locate Eliza's hidden assets for years without success. The painting, the key to accessing everything, had hung in plain sight all along, protected by its apparent worthlessness. I spoke with Amelia Reyes, Sophie said, as our plane began its descent into JFK. Amelia was a lawyer friend of hers who specialized in estate litigation. She says your position is extremely strong legally. The will explicitly left you the painting, and your grandmother's account was her separate property to dispose of as she wished. Jackson won't give up easily, I replied, thinking of his last message. He's used to getting everything he wants. Not this time, Sophie said firmly. Harold Thompson contacted me the day after our return, requesting a meeting at his office. I brought Sophie along as support, and Amelia Reyes as my legal representation. I've known about Eliza's arrangement since she set it up, Harold explained once we were seated in his conference room. She made me promise to ensure the painting went to you, regardless of your parents' wishes. My parents knew about the account, I asked. They suspected its existence but never knew the details. After Eliza's death, they became obsessed with finding it. When they died, I honored my promise to your grandmother by explicitly naming the painting in their will. Why not just tell me directly? Amelia asked. Harold looked uncomfortable. Eliza was specific about how Courtney should discover her inheritance. She believed the journey of discovery was important, that Courtney needed to find her strength before finding the money. It sounded exactly like something my grandmother would say, and despite the complications it had caused, I understood the wisdom behind it. Had Harold simply handed me access to millions, I might not have found the courage to stand up to my family. Jackson requested a family meeting the following week. This time I arrived with Amelia beside me, prepared for whatever accusations or threats might come. The family had gathered at my parents' home, now legally Jackson's property. Aunt Paula, Uncle Gregory, and several cousins sat around the dining room table with Jackson at the head. The tension in the room was palpable as I took my seat. I think we all know why we're here, Jackson began. Grandmother Eliza's secret account has been discovered, and Courtney has claimed it entirely for herself. As was clearly grandmother's intention, I replied calmly. The money should remain within the family, Aunt Paula interjected. It should be shared among all of us. Amelia opened her portfolio. I have copies of all relevant documents establishing Mrs. Eliza Bennett's legal right to dispose of her separate property as she saw fit, as well as clear documentation of her wishes regarding this specific account. This isn't about legalities, Jackson said dismissively. It's about what's right for the family. I looked around the table at relatives who had barely acknowledged my existence for years, who had attended my museum exhibitions only when obligated, who had never shown interest in my life or career. What family? I asked quietly. The one that left me a single painting while giving Jackson everything else. The one that never valued my interests or accomplishments, that family. Uncle Gregory shifted uncomfortably. One of my cousins stared at the table. We've always treated you as part of the family, Jackson insisted. No, I replied, my voice stronger now. You treated me as less than, as an afterthought. Grandmother Eliza was the only one who ever truly saw me. So this is revenge, Jackson demanded. Taking millions that should remain part of the Bennett assets, Amelia interrupted before I could respond. Let me be perfectly clear. The funds in question were never part of the general Bennett assets. They were Eliza Bennett's separate property established before her marriage and maintained independently throughout her life. She had every legal right to designate a specific heir, which she did explicitly and with careful planning. The legal discussion continued with Amelia calmly dismantling every argument Jackson's lawyer presented. By meeting's end, it was clear they had no legal grounds to challenge my inheritance. As people began to disperse, Jackson approached me privately. His expression was difficult to read, a mixture of frustration and something that might have been respect. You surprised me, Courtney, he said. I never thought you had this in you. There's a lot about me you never bothered to know, I replied. He nodded slowly. Perhaps that's true. After a pause, he added, What will you do with the money? It was the first genuine question he'd ever asked about my plans or desires. I'm establishing an art scholarship in grandmother's name, I told him. The rest will allow me to pursue curatorial projects I'm passionate about without worrying about finances. You're not going to quit your job, buy a mansion, live extravagantly. I shook my head. That was never what I wanted. I just wanted to be valued for who I am. Something shifted in his expression, then perhaps the first glimmer of actual understanding between us. 3 months later, I settled into my new home, not a mansion, but a comfortable brownstone in Brooklyn, with enough space for a proper home office and a small gallery wall for rotating exhibitions of emerging artists. I kept my position at the museum, but accepted the title of Special Projects Curator, allowing me to develop programs that brought art education to underserved communities. The Eliza Bennett Scholarship Fund provided educational opportunities for young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds, with a focus on those interested in art conservation and history, rather than just creation, preserving the stories behind art, just as my grandmother had valued. My relationship with my family remained complicated. Jackson, surprisingly, had been the first to extend an olive branch, inviting me to coffee a month after our legal confrontation. Our conversation was stilted at first, but gradually became more genuine as he asked about my museum work with what appeared to be actual interest. I never understood why art history mattered to you, he admitted. Father always said it was impractical. It's about stories, I explained. Every piece contains the story of its creator, its time, its journey. I find those stories fascinating. He nodded thoughtfully. I think I've been missing the stories, seeing only the investment potential. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was an acknowledgement, perhaps the beginning of a different type of relationship. Other family members varied in their responses. Some remained distant, clearly resentful of my inheritance. Others made awkward attempts at closer connection, their motivations transparent. I established boundaries with all of them, engaging on my terms, rather than desperately seeking approval as I once had. The painting, the key to everything, hung in my new living room, no longer ugly to my eyes, but beautiful in its significance. TM. I had discovered was Teresa Müller, a Swiss artist and close friend of my grandmother's, who had created the piece specifically to conceal the banking information. What had seemed amateurish was intentionally designed to appear unremarkable, ensuring it would never attract attention from those who valued art only for its pedigree or price tag. On quiet evenings, I often found myself studying it, appreciating the subtle skill that had created a piece designed to be overlooked. In its unremarkable surface, my grandmother had hidden extraordinary value, not just monetary, but in the form of independence, confidence, and self-worth she had wanted for me. Sophie visited often, proudly taking credit for encouraging me to stand up for myself. "You always had it in you," she insisted. "You just needed the right moment to find your voice." She was right. The journey to claim my inheritance had forced me to discover strength I hadn't known I possessed, exactly as Grandmother Eliza had intended. The money provided security, but the real treasure had been finding the courage to assert my value in a family that had always diminished it. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through my new bay windows, I noticed something I hadn't seen before in the painting. When the light hit it just right, faint shapes resembling daffodils appeared in the yellowish area I had previously thought was discoloration. Another hidden message from my grandmother, visible only from the right perspective. Like those daffodils, my own worth had always been there, waiting to be recognized from the proper angle. The journey of discovery had changed how I saw myself, how I engaged with my family, how I moved through the world. The painting that had seemed worthless now represented something priceless, the knowledge that I was enough exactly as I was, regardless of others' validation. It was the most valuable inheritance my grandmother could have left me. What about you? Have you ever discovered something valuable that others overlooked? Or had a family member who saw your true worth when others didn't? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found my story meaningful, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more family stories, and share this video with someone who might need a reminder of their own value. Thanks for listening to my journey. Sometimes our greatest treasures are hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to discover them.